So thank you for viewing this video, my friends. This is a review and a training for peacekeepers at the polls here in Ohio for the upcoming primaries, of which we have two, and the general election for 2022 and a precursor for 2024. And I am the Reverend Joan Van Biesler, and I'm with North Unitarian Universalist Congregation in Lewis Center, where I am a retired minister. Susan, if you want to introduce yourself.
Hi, my name is Reverend Dr. Susan Smith. I am with the Ohio Voter Rights Coalition, and I'm also the founder and leader of Crazy Faith Ministries here in Columbus, Ohio. Ife.
Ife?
Greetings, everyone. My name is Ifeolu Claytor. I am the Ohio campaign manager for All Voting is Local, and I'm also on the steering committee for the Ohio Voter Rights Coalition. It's a pleasure to be with everybody today.
And we are all part of the Ohio Voter Rights Coalition and the Faith Leaders Subcommittee. Thank you. Let me start off with just a small quote here by the Representative John Lewis, who said that freedom is not a state, it's an act. It's not some enchanted garden perched high on a distant plateau where we can finally sit down and rest. Freedom is the continuous action we all must take, and each generation must do its part to create an even more fair and more just society. So with that in mind, why are we here? What is this about? We are here to learn or review some basic voter rights and learn how we might support voters as they are waiting to cast their ballots. We are here to learn some conflict intervention skills, a few bits of mediation strategies, de-escalation tactics, and safety measures to be applied to tense situations, hoping that we will never, ever have to use any of these. Okay. We want to offer some alternatives to escalation or calling in the police at the polls if there's a tense situation, because if we're able to de-escalate it, then the poll workers won't be tempted to call in the police, which quite frankly always escalates the situation. And today we're not going to be working through scenarios, but at some future point we might work through some scenarios with each other, little bits of role play. Let me just ask those of you who are here live this time, what do you think is the role of a peacekeeper given our current election environment? Just toss it out there. Tell me what you think.
Well, I think the primary role of the peacekeeper is to, it sounds so stupid, but to do exactly that. There is so much friction in the air. People are confused politically and they're agitated. And I think the primary role is to kind of do what we can to alleviate or minimize the agitation that is exacerbated by the anxiety about not really knowing what's going on. And so it's really a good time to build relationships with people and have conversations with people in an effort to just quiet the spirits of people.
Janet and Jay are on. Thank you for coming and welcome. We're answering the question, what do we think is the role of a peacekeeper given our current election environment? Others?
It does seem to me there's a kind of welcoming aspect to the whole thing, that, like, you know, you could be there and there is no friction, or there isn't, and it's just, you know, well, we're so glad you're here, we're so glad you're voting, hello, you know, that welcoming people's, and seeing sometimes people have questions. And I was thinking about kind of the early vote peacekeepers last time, about how just incredibly long the line was, and how, like, everything makes us anxious right now, so that people were, you know, they weren't necessarily, you know, getting up to fisticuffs, but they were just anxious, and just saying hello to people makes people more comfortable.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Other thoughts?
Yeah, I think to build on what Catherine said, the idea of being a non-anxious presence in a space where folks are filled with questions and anxiety and don't know what maybe to expect, and then from the standpoint of of a faith leader, being a peacemaker, I think, even more so than peacekeeper would resonate with me. In the Christian tradition, the idea of Jesus blessing those who are peacemakers and moving against the waves that would cause anxiousness and folks to feel unwelcome or marginalized.
Mhm. Any other thoughts on that?
Right.
Yeah, I was
Oh,
just
go ahead,
gonna,
Janet.
I was just gonna echo Hank. I was thinking of, being that non-anxious, welcoming presence. It just, yeah. So you took the words out of my mouth.
I learned in pastoral care that there's no such thing as a non-anxious presence, but there are less anxious presences. Oh, presence. Okay,
I
sorry about
think
that.
no, that's true.
Go ahead.
I think that it in the most extreme cases where we hope we don't need them, the peacekeepers are a line of defense that against voter intimidation. I mean, I don't think that we can ignore the reality of the world in which we live at the moment, and that's why we're calling on some of our greatest, some of our most trained and most apt to deal with folks who may have divergent views, folks who may be unsettled in their spirits. And so using the strengths that already exist within our peacekeepers to then protect democracy and people's access to their right to vote, I think makes them the perfect person to stand in that gap and make sure that folks feel comfortable and can kind of help decrease anxiety, decrease tensions, and keep people literally at peace. It's funny because it sounds too logical to be true, but it really is a perfect title for exactly what we need our peacekeepers to do in this, especially in this environment.
Okay. Any other thoughts about the role?
Just add, going right along with what I'm thinking of is kind of setting a tone, including all of that non-anxious, less anxious presence, but even really proactively setting the tone, in that welcoming space. And this is really a joyous occasion and something to celebrate, that we're getting to exercise our rights to vote. And so, when there's not conflict that we're trying to resolve, we may be able to bring some joy into that space as well.
Thank you, Jay. Yeah.
And I should also say, well, I didn't expect to be able to be here at all. I'm on the clock. So if I get pulled away or called away, I apologize.
It's okay. We are recording this, and we'll be sharing it with 30 other people who couldn't make it tonight. Okay, any other thoughts before I move on to the next slide? Okay. We also had a little working definition of peacekeepers that I'd like to give you. Basics: conflict prevention. Let's not let a stepped on toe become a fist fight. Okay. De-escalation, harm reduction there, to provide a safe and calm and friendly voting environment, to be that welcoming presence that y'all have articulated very well. One of the things during these slides that we want to keep reiterating is that all peacekeepers should have tattooed or etched on their arms or in their pockets or whatever, or on their glasses, the hotline of 866 Our Vote. And we'll talk about that more. But we're just going to talk about it, raise it up quite a bit, because we also have 866 Our Vote in English, Spanish, Asian and Pacific languages, and Arabic, so that you are not there alone as a peacekeeper. You have a lifeline. You have a way of calling for help instantly. And that's something that we want to make sure that all the peacekeepers know, that they're not out there alone. So that's just setting the stage. Now I'm going to let Susan talk about the voting environment right now and ask you questions.
Okay, thanks, Joan. So as we all mentioned in the definition of peacekeeper, we're trying to keep people calm, bring a sense of peace. because everything is so crazy. And I, you know, I smiled when Jay said it was a happy time, because for a lot of people, it's not going to be a happy time. It's a stress-filled time. And people are bringing a lot of anger um, and questions, and maybe some defensiveness, and, you know, all kinds of things that maybe we didn't see in the 2020 election. So there's resentment and confusion about voter suppression. There's fears and worries from my perspective, fears of intimidation by people who are actively trying to intimidate people to stay away from the polls. Historically, that has been the case. When there's been like white backlash against all the things that happen when Black people, brown people get 2 steps forward, the white backlash comes, and there has been historically documented rabid intimidation at the polls. So I worry about all of that. There's polarization. We're all polarized. We're all polarized. There's COVID-19. So now the strain, you know, some people think that COVID's all gone. You know, it's gone away. I don't think that. And so some people will have their masks on, and some people will not. And now it has become, as opposed to a public health issue, now it's a political issue. And so there will be people there in masks, and there will be people not in masks, and there will be people kind of maybe intimidating back and forth, either way, I guess, about why do you have your mask on, or why don't you have a mask on? So we'll have that. All of the misinformation on social media is real damaging. I just told Joan that I was in a meeting with clergy persons the other day, and one pastor from, I think he's from Indiana, said that he has a group of congregations, and he says, here's the thing. He said, they listen to a scripture on Sunday, they come to church on Sunday, but then they watch Fox News for 6 days out of the week. And he said, what happens is when we preach a sermon, he said, we'll say things that are in scripture, and they will push back and say, that's not in the Bible. So he says, what we're fighting is this place where, for some people, politics has been, has become theology, and theology has become politics. And that's very, very, very dangerous. There have been protests for racial justice and resentment around those protests. All the various lawsuits are on the drop boxes and access to absentee ballots. I don't know about you, but I've heard that so many absentee mail-in ballots have been rejected, and that's making people mad. Issues with the mail-in ballots in the post office for the 2020 election. My heart sinks. My heart sinks when I think about what's going on in our country, and I remember seeing the pictures of mailboxes with chains around them. And this our country, so that people would be dissuaded from mailing in their ballots. It really literally almost makes me physically ill. And then there's problems in some counties with these absentee ballots with primary and early voting. And then of course there's all the confusion around the primaries themselves because of all of the map drawing thing. So we have a lot of areas where people are very uptight. And the issues in past elections, I don't know if you have ever had to stand in a line. I stood in a line once for, I don't know, it was in the 2020 election. It was cold and it was raining. It was a presidential election. That was the Al Gore, not the 2020, the 2010, 2000 election, whatever the election that was. But it was raining and it was cold, and they had 2 voting machines, and the line was down the block, and it was alpha. And I stood in line for like 7 hours. I promise you. I said, so these lines have been prohibitive in some areas. So we have lines, we have the broken machines, all this stuff right here that we're seeing on the slide. I've lived it. I have breathed it. So I know how exasperating it is. Inadequate signage, the high use of the provisional ballots, and I don't even know if I don't know if people really even understand the difference yet of provisional ballots and regular ballots. So, but that's an issue. Poll workers giving wrong information. Oh my gosh. And that may very well increase because a lot of people who were poll workers, because they are anxious about what's going on, what they've heard is going on, they're not coming back to the polls. So you have new people coming to do poll work and they don't know what they're talking about. And that is in addition to people who have been working the polls for a long time, but give misinformation because they are given misinformation. The intimidating flyers or police presence is an issue. Multiple voters reporting that they are not on the rolls. And that's why we encourage people to check. I encourage people, at least on my social media, to check their voter registration every single month, because people assume that because they've been able to vote for the past 20 years that they'll be able to vote this time, and it's not necessarily so. That's in all elections. And so, telling people to kind of alleviate that particular issue, people saying that they're not on the rolls, you can alleviate that if we can all work to get people to check their voter registration once a month. And then people who don't speak English having issues there, those have been issues, and they will be exacerbated, when we are where we are here. One of the issues that, again, I'm concerned about is the firearms and open carry thing. Everybody's got a gun. I mean, how many mass shootings were there last week? I mean, it's just like crazy. So you can look, how, Hank, you were talking about how, people were supposed to do what Jesus says. And I remember, one of the days and being angry at Pharisees is when I realized that they could, divorce a woman for any reason. If they woke up in the morning, they didn't like the way she looked, or they didn't like the way she cooked, they could just divorce her and it was legal. Well, people have that feeling now that they can just pull out their guns and use it whenever they disagree with somebody. And that's scary to me personally. But it's generally illegal, and this is something we need to know, to carry a firearm in a public K through 12 school zone, and on a public or private college or university, a place of worship, or government facility. Ife, is a polling place considered a government facility? Okay, so we need to know that because we just don't know who's going to come with a little gun in their pocket and have an attitude and feel empowered by the current political environment to use it. So.
I believe that I'm up now. So poll workers are trained to call the police in situations of tension. So that's something we shouldn't be surprised by, but also in that situation, it's important for us to remember, especially our peacekeepers, to understand that our peacekeepers are there to be peacekeepers, but we are not police officers. And so we're making sure that we're never touching police officers, that we might not, because that might be taken or assumed to be or presumed to be assault or resisting arrest. We don't want to argue or get upset or be hostile with police officers or even speak in a confrontational tone. So in the sense of peacekeepers, this is exactly where it's important for peacekeepers to keep the peace within themselves. Mm-hmm. Recording interactions is okay, and advising folks to be calm is encouraged. If an arrest does occur, there is no expectation that you should be arrested, because you are not, this is not a nonviolent direct action event. So ask if you are being detained, or if not, then walk away. If you are arrested, say that you want to remain silent. I want to see a lawyer, and then remain silent. Do not talk. It might hurt others if you talk. And so we want to make sure that we are just maintaining our peace in those experiences, even though we pray to God that they do not happen. So this is one of the things that we are recruiting our peacekeepers to be a force against, and that is intimidation. So there are different kinds of voter intimidation. Some of these are common examples, and they are unlawful. So verbal or physical confrontation of voters by persons dressed in official-looking uniforms. So I can buy a security guard uniform and look like a police officer, but clearly not actually be a police officer. And that is a form of intimidation. Physical intimidation, standing or hovering close to voters as they attempt to vote. Flyers threatening jail time or other punitive actions against persons who vote. That's something that can definitely that can occur. Direct confrontation or questioning voters, or asking voters for documentation where none is required. Vandalism of polling place. Also, use of police officers to threaten or intimidate voters, and or threats made by an employer to the job, wages, or benefits of an employee if he or she does not vote in a particular manner. And occupying the parking lot of a polling place in such a way that voters might be hindered from voting. So these are all things that either we have seen or that we could see. And so we want to be aware of those things. What is considered harassment when it comes to election law? So obstructing the access of a voter to a polling place. And one of the things about obstructing the access of a voter, there are signs where there should be signs at every polling location. There are about, I want to say 100 yards from the door where people who are handing out campaign literature and other things of that nature must be beyond. And so obstructing that line or obstructing the possibility for someone to get to the polling place or to the Board of Elections if they were voting early. Molesting or otherwise engaging in violence against election observers performing their duties. We will talk about the role of election observers in a little bit. I see your hand, Susan. I'll come in 1 second. Participating in a riot, violence, or tumult or disorder at a place of an election, or another improper practice tending to obstruct, intimidate, or interfere with the voter at a place of election, as well as violating several other provisions of the election code. I see Susan's hand, so go ahead, Reverend Dr. Susan Smith.
No, I just wanted to ask a question so that we could communicate it. If people see, if peacemakers see these types of intimidation, they should do what?
So, and it kind of depends on what we're seeing. But one thing that's common or one thing that's possible is if you're present, and especially if there's not a poll monitor present, communicating with the people who work at the polling location, because they will understand. That's like one of the safest things to do, where we're not involved in calling the police, because that's like our very last option is to call the police, because police forces can be intimidating. But communicating with the poll worker or the precinct captain, their voting location manager is what typically they're called on election day. And so they will be aware, okay, then it's somebody, so it doesn't have to be a peacekeeper necessarily. It could be an elections or a poll worker telling someone who is obstructing voters, hey, we have rules about who can engage with voters and how they can engage with voters, and you are violating those rules. So that it's somebody, so it's coming from the Board of Elections, an elections official, and not necessarily just an advocate. But depending on the situation, it is possible that, hey, these folks are just trying to vote. We're not sure who they're voting for or what they're here to support, but they're here to vote. And we want to make sure that everyone has access to their right to vote. It's some language that we can use. And I see Joan's hand also.
Okay. And I was going to note that when we know that there's a situation at a particular polling place and we call in peacekeepers, who may be on call, we always like to have at least two together.
Right.
So that you're not facing this stuff alone. If need be, we'll call in 3 or so, but we don't want to have you there by yourself.
Right.
And if I may, Ife, is the other part is when we had the other peacekeeper training and we mentioned that perhaps as a form of intimidation, you've already mentioned it, but if you see a police officer in a parking lot, writing down license plate numbers, again, who do the peacemakers talk to about that? Because that's intimidation. Did he freeze?
Is that when they should call the 866 number?
I'm thinking, because I think he froze. I just wanted that to be on the record.
He
for people
froze.
I think he froze. But I think that's an important thing for us to mention, because that very well may happen, that the police officers may be those who are intimidating and that way. So thanks.
Ife, are you frozen?
He's so frozen.
Okay, well, that's why he's not responding then. But that's one of the reasons we do like to send people out, 2 or more. We do have the 866, our vote phone number that you can call, and we will have people, usually Ife, myself, and Dan Clark with Faith in Public Life, who are manning the phones and trying to help people find what they need, depending on the situation. And now that Ife's back, we're at voter challenges.
Yes, sorry. So thank you all. Slight connectivity issue, I'm sure. In this digital world, we've all experienced. Thank you all for patience. So voter challenges. Ohio law permits challenges to the qualifications of voters by precinct election officials, not by private citizens. And this is so important for us to understand, and it's important for us to understand because it's important for the public to understand. Because now there is rhetoric of people feeling the need to protect the vote or to protect their polling place, etc. That is not the role of everyday citizens. Regardless of what what certain elected leaders have said, the only a precinct election official is allowed to challenge somebody's right to vote, and essentially everyone is allowed to vote. So essentially, if I'm trying to vote in a precinct where I'm not registered, I may have to vote provisionally. That is really an option we don't want to take. We would prefer, if a voter is being told that they have to vote provisionally, we would rather them call the 866 Our Vote hotline first, because it's possible that, okay, we might be able to redirect them. We might be able to help assuage their understanding. Maybe their polling location changed and they don't realize. But a private, regardless of the situation that may cause someone to not be able to vote at whatever location they are trying to vote at the time, it is not a private citizen that will tell them that they're not able to vote their regular ballot as opposed to voting provisionally. Any attempt to challenge a voter by someone who is not an election official is prohibited and may constitute voter intimidation. So if the voter is challenged by a precinct election official, they may be challenged on the grounds that they are not a resident of Ohio or of the precinct, a U.S. citizen, or of legal voting age, but may not be challenged for any other reason. And this is Ohio law. So this is important to realize. And if somebody is challenged and is unable or refuses to prove their eligibility to vote to the satisfaction of precinct election officials, they may still vote with a provisional ballot, which requires them to provide documentation to the Board of Elections within 7 days of the election for their ballot to count. And so I mean, people can be removed from the voting rolls or may have their address changed for whatever reason. I mean, I had a family member experience this last year where they voted in the primary at their polling location, and they re-registered their car, but they maintained 2 residences, one in a different county. So when they re-registered their car in a different county, they were told they weren't registered at their polling location or in their county. And they're like, wait, I just voted in the primary. It's the general. How? I have a picture of me voting here in the primary. How am I not registered here? But when they updated their registration for their car, it actually changed their registration to a different county because of where they registered their car, and they maintained 2 residences. So they.
Uh-oh. Well, let me just finish up with one sentence there while Yifei comes back. People have become very upset when they are been told they have to vote provisionally. And if you see somebody coming out of the polling place and they are, incredibly upset, this may be a reason, and to help them realize that they have to follow whatever stipulations have been laid on them in terms of documentation and coming back in order to have their ballot count, because this is a common way of getting very frustrated.
And again, Joan, if peacekeepers hear a person in line challenging somebody else's right to vote, what should the peacekeeper do?
And there's Ife. I'll let
So-
him.
Yeah, we are clearly experiencing a lot of technical difficulties. So we're going to continue
Okay.
this cell phone that is going to provide more access when it comes to the digital than my computer clearly is.
Susan had a great question for you.
If the peacekeeper hears the person in line challenging the right to vote of another person, what should the peacekeeper do? Or peacemaker? Sorry.
So the peacekeeper can kind of inform them, hey, if this person is not eligible to vote here, the precinct election official will inform them inside. If it continues beyond that, then that's when you want to notify that voting location manager. But being aware that, hey, the precinct election officials who are trained very well in the voting location managers, they have poll books, they know who is registered in which precincts and registered to vote at this location. They will inform the voter if they are ineligible to vote for whichever reason, if they're ineligible to vote at this location. But that is for the elections officials, not for individual citizens. And so, because some of these folks think that they have legitimate concerns, which we don't necessarily agree with, in my personal opinion, especially because it's not their duty to decide or to determine who is eligible to vote in whichever precinct. However, they are under the impression they're defending democracy. And so part of keeping that peace is just getting them to stop as quickly as possible, which might start with that, and then it might end with talking to the voting location manager, because that is voter intimidation.
And then a rundown of basic voter rights.
Awesome. And so, yeah, so an outline of the voter rights. If you are at the correct precinct and registered, but you do not have the proper ID, or you're not on the poll list, then you must be allowed to vote with a provisional ballot. So on election day, your voter ID, on election day, you do need an identification. That can be a driver's license, a state ID, a utility bill, a cell phone bill counts as a utility bill, a bank statement, a government issued document. So if that's a check, if there are people who are on government assistance or people who receive disability, those types of documentation, as long as it has your address on it. The only ID that I'm aware of that does not require an address is a military ID. So if you have a passport, like I have a passport, unfortunately your passport does not have your address on it, and so it does not count as a voting ID. However, there are plenty of other forms of identification that you can use. You do have the right to vote provisional ballot if you have moved to a different precinct in Ohio within 30 days of the election. You will receive a notice that tells you how to determine your vote was counted and why or why not. So if somebody has to vote provisionally, they will get kind of a piece of paper that will tell them, hey, you can prove. So if you come to the precinct election or to the location on election day, you don't have your driver's license or your state ID or et cetera, you can go back to the Board of Elections within 7 days and show them a utility bill. Say, hey, I didn't have this with me on election day, but I am eligible to vote. And so you all need to count my ballot. You must be allowed to vote if you are in line before the polls close. That is so important, and that's actually where some of our peacekeepers might be most important, is just keeping people calm, especially if folks are coming. If 50% of the voters go to vote after work, it's going to be a decent line at that polling location. And so the polls are open on election day from 6 a.m. to 7:30 p.m. from 6:30 a.m. until 7:30 p.m. And so if you are in line at 7:30 p.m. on election day, then they have to let you vote. And so that's where we may experience some lines, but that's also where we have the opportunity to put on our peacekeeper hat and keep people calm in the polls. You are not required to provide proof of citizenship to vote, but you do need an ID to vote on election day. If you go and vote early, you can just give them your social security number, or if you know your state ID or driver's license number, they will allow you to vote. If you go to vote early at your Board of Election. If you need assistance due to disability, you can be assisted by a person of your choice, but not your employer or a union rep or a candidate. You can also receive assistance from poll workers. So this is really important. And also there's opportunities for folks who are disabled to participate in curbside voting. And so it's important for us to realize those opportunities for folks who are disabled. This is not unfair. This is where if somebody's trying to challenge it, these are legally permissible, and it expands access to the ballot for folks who may be disabled. Polling places are neutral ground, and so poll workers cannot wear campaign materials, attire, or paraphernalia. Voters must also follow these rules. And so it's really important to realize if I am supporting candidate X for president, I cannot wear, or for Congress in this election, I cannot wear a baseball cap or a sticker or a t-shirt or any type of paraphernalia for candidate X on my way into the Board of Elections or into my precinct polling location. If I do identify with a party, I have a sample ballot from that party, I can take that in with me, but I can't leave it. I can't be handing out partisan information or parties, or like a one pager or a flyer for a candidate. I can't hand out that materials in the Board of Elections or in a polling location, but I am allowed to take a sample ballot. However, I am not allowed to just be broadcasting whichever congressional candidate or county candidate I am supporting in this election. So that's important that voters realize. And that's not intimidation. That's just the rules that we have so that we are not electioneering or campaigning inside of a polling location. Candidates and volunteers are not permitted to campaign within 100 feet of the polling place, and it is often marked by small American flags, and campaigners are not allowed within 10 feet of folks in line. So if somebody, I will use Cuyahoga County because that's where I'm from. There's a parking lot that we often use for Cuyahoga County's Board of Elections that is across the street. People who are campaigners can post up across the street, can hand out literature as voters leave the parking lot to go across the street to the Board of Elections. However, they cannot be hovering over folks that are in the line. They cannot campaign within 100 feet of the entrance to the precinct, to the polling location. And so that's important to realize. And I saw a question in the chat. Let me open the
Yeah,
poll
Amariah
worker.
had.
Yes. And so Pastor Amariah McIntosh put in the chat that the assistance you receive from poll workers should also be bipartisan. And so that's important that we realize, especially in this very charged environment, that our elections are run in a bipartisan fashion. So there should be an equal number of Democratic poll workers as there are Republican poll workers. And so that's something that can give us peace and give us calmness, is that voters are experiencing a bipartisan effort. They're working with trained professionals who are taught to administer the election in a bipartisan fashion as to not favor one party or the other. And so while some folks may not quite understand that, it is our duty to kind of understand that, to bring people peace and calm them in a sense where in the opportunity for them to be dismayed or to have some, just to be uncomfortable.
To breathe in a bipartisan manner. And Jeff
Correct.
has a question. Jeff?
Go ahead.
Hi. Yeah, I was tapping it out, but the gist is, if someone in line is wearing a Joe Blow is the best, vote for him T-shirt, and they're in line to go in to vote, is there any, do we say, dude, this is going to be an issue for you, or do we
No.
let it go?
So the precinct election officials will inform whomever. So if they're wearing a X or Y candidate T-shirt, and let's say I'm wearing a T-shirt underneath this jacket, the precinct election officials will ask me to button my jacket. Or if I'm wearing a hoodie or whatever, if I'm wearing a zipper jacket, they'll ask me, hey, can you zip up your jacket? Hey, can you remove your baseball cap? So in line, people are allowed to wear whatever they would like. When they enter the polling location, the precinct election official will inform them or will ask them to cover up whatever identifying information or whatever article of clothing may be endorsing or supporting a particular candidate.
Okay, so when they're in line, they can wear whatever they can expose themselves to whatever message they want to give to the people.
Correct. And
Okay.
I see the question in the chat from Jay McNeil. So when the line extends beyond those markers, candidates and reps cannot hand out materials, even if people in line invite them closer. So folks in line can invite you closer to hand out materials. That's kind of like a slightly dicier part, just because the lines can get longer. At Cuyahoga County last year, we saw, especially in 2020, we saw lines that went on for blocks and blocks. Voters can invite you to hand out materials closer to the line, but what we don't want is folks just hovering. And like that's where we get into the lane of like harassment, is when there are folks campaigning or electioneering and they're just hovering over voters and lecturing them about candidate X or Y. That's what we don't want. Handing them literature, a lot of times folks might want a partisan sample ballot. They want to make sure that they're voting for their party. Primaries in Ohio are partisan unless you pull an issues only ballot. So sometimes people do want that information. However, what we don't want is candidates or campaigns. And this has happened. I mean, I'll speak for my county, Cuyahoga. Campaigns and elections can get really tense. And folks are very passionate about their candidates. What we don't want is for that to hit the line of intimidation, or for it to hit the line to become harassment because campaigns are overzealous or just or intimidating because of their proximity to the line. I think Joan was starting to interrupt me. Was there another question you had, Reverend Joan?
No, I was just going to note that I have seen poll officials ask someone to take their T-shirt off and turn it inside out as a convenient way of eliminating the message as they entered. So there's a lot of creative ways of doing that.
Right. And so who can enter a polling location? This is really important. So voters can enter polling locations. A person who is assisting a voter or a person who is voting, a voter's child who is not yet of voting age, elections officials, employees of the Board of Elections, observers, here bearing a certificate of appointment by, and there's a section that will be below, that will be on, I think the next slide, police officers, journalists, and persons reviewing the official list of registered voters at 6:30 a.m., 11 a.m., or 4 p.m., provided they do not engage in conduct that would constitute harassment or violation of the election law. So observers, this is important. So parties can appoint an observer, as well as campaigns can also appoint an observer to kind of watch the process, to watch elections officials while they work. These people should have a certificate of appointment. And so this is not just every random citizen who appoints themselves. No, a campaign will appoint someone to be an observer, but those observers are not allowed to talk to voters. They are not allowed to participate in the process. They are literally there to observe. But that is for the precinct election official to manage that. So it just so that we are aware that that is a legitimate thing, that there are observers, they should have a certificate, but that is for the precinct election officials and the voting location manager to kind of check whomever's certificate. That's not on us as peacekeepers. And then also, can we go back to the last slide really quickly?
Oh, sorry.
All is well. So also the boards of elections or the precinct places do post lists of who voted, not for whom, but at 6:30 a.m., 11 a.m., and 4 p.m., they post a list. Typically it's on the door, where people can see, okay, John Smith and Mary Jackson and Bill Johnson, and they'll see a whole list of the folks who are registered to vote at this polling location who have in fact voted. And this is a tool for campaigns to see, okay, turnout is low. Okay, and for a campaign, they could see, okay, we confirmed that 200 people who are supposed to vote at this polling location have voted, or that we know that 200 of our supporters said that who are at this polling location have or have not voted. And so we can kind of check in, maybe we're doing calls to remind people to get out and vote. That is permissible by election law. That is campaign, especially on some of these school levies. They want to know who, if they have a high turnout or a low turnout, what that might mean for their school levy or for any other levy of that matter. And sometimes in more localized races, that's standard. So there are folks who are allowed to check that. And so we want to be aware of that, not that we're policing that, but just to be aware that this is not intimidation, as long as they're not participating in intimidation, because they should be looking at that list and talking to their campaigns afterward, not talking to voters. Now we can jump ahead. So other helpful roles at the polls, we have election protection ambassadors, which we are training at the moment. The ambassadors are passing out election protection information, whether those be hot cards, whether those be cards for to educate folks on who may be disabled or folks who have been incarcerated on how they have access to the right to vote. Mind you, all these roles are nonpartisan. We have nonpartisan poll monitors. We have a slightly fewer number of poll monitors this year than we had in 2020. So, but poll monitors are kind of like your best friend, because the peacekeepers are kind of like who we're calling in the case that there are really tense situations. But poll monitors will be able to answer those more basic questions like, they're telling me I have to vote provisionally. And then some of these cases, these folks will be just directing people to the hotline so that you don't have to. But the poll monitors are there to just kind of answer basic questions. Oh, they're telling you have to vote provisionally. Which type of ID do you have? No, a military ID is a valid voting ID. Those types of questions, so that folks are kind of aware. It's just to kind of back up so that we are training you all as peacekeepers to help de-escalate potentially tense situations. But the nonpartisan poll monitors are really there to educate if there are really confusing topics when it comes to the law of election law. We're giving you the background so that you have it, but really the poll monitors, that's the crux of their training and the purpose of their training. We also have social media monitors who are watching social media to make sure that there's not mis or disinformation being shared on social media. If somebody's sharing the wrong election hours, we want to make sure that we don't want to repost or reshare misinformation or disinformation, but we want to put out into the atmosphere that when we see something, we want to put the correct information out into the atmosphere. Like voting hours on election day are 6:30 a.m. until 7:30 p.m. Those are the types of things that we want to post out in positive ways. command center volunteers. So you've heard us talk about the 866 hour vote phone number. It's also available in a few different languages that are on the slide above, were in the slides at the beginning. But when somebody calls that hotline and goes to a volunteer, and then it also, if the volunteer that initially answers can't handle it, it'll come to someone like myself or like Catherine Tercer. It'll come to someone who's worked for the election protection program for several years and who can understand. Maybe we had a situation, I keep coming back to IDs, but we had a situation where in Summit County, a poll worker told somebody that their military ID was not a valid voting ID. And so I was able to call the Summit County Board of Elections and talk to their director and say, hey, make sure that we're addressing, that our poll workers understand that this is not correct information. They turned a voter away. And so we need to make sure that we're giving correct information. If folks want to become a poll monitor, if you have folks in your congregations or folks that you associate with in your communities who want to be poll monitors, there's a bit.ly link, and that's http://bit.ly/poll monitor. And so poll monitors and command center are great support for peacekeepers, because the idea for our peacekeepers, again, should be our last line of defense, making sure that folks, if they are potentially tense or escalated situations, then we want to make sure that they understand that's their role more so than just giving people election advice.
And Catherine has put in election protection materials and how you can get some of those for your use, as well as another link for April 28th poll monitor training. Thank you.
And so our poll monitors are volunteers, but a lot of them are also voting advocates. In previous years, we had volunteers in Akron, Cincinnati, Athens, Cleveland, Columbus, Dayton, Toledo, and Youngstown. Really, we will train poll monitors anywhere. If you are not in one of those hubs or areas, we will train poll monitors anywhere because they can be used anywhere. We have seen a lot of issues in our major metropolitan areas, but if you're in a more rural area and you have congregants, or you have people in your community who want to be poll monitors, we will train them. And Catherine has been so great as to put that link in the chat. When are they available? They have participated during early vote. So typically at your Board of Elections or an early vote location, typically those are the same thing, but in a few instances or in some counties, they're not. They are also typically available on election day. On election days in particular, we try to target where we're sending them to areas where we assume there are more likely to be voter challenges or issues. Voters are more likely to be disenfranchised. But what they do is that there's a field reporting structure where they can call in problems or questions, especially if they don't know the answer. So we train them so they know the answer to some preliminary questions, but also they can call into the command center or 866 Our Vote. Again, 866 Our Vote. If the initial volunteer on that hotline can't answer, they will refer it to our command center. And if somebody needs to call the Board of Elections, that'll be me or one of our awesome voting advocates to make sure that we're talking to our boards of elections, because the boards really are our friends. But sometimes there's been somebody's mistaken and we have to kind of correct that. And they're also recording general inquiries and observations either on a paper form, or we also have digital formats. And so the role of a poll monitor is to ensure voters know their rights, to answer voters' questions, assist them by checking their registration status, polling place information, absentee or mail-in ballot, fixing issues in real time. And they are collecting data from the voters in all conversations to report larger and systemic issues to the command center. So if we see that there have been 10 people who have come out of polling location AB because someone has told them that their ID isn't valid, but is a valid ID, then like that's a larger issue where we have to call the Board of Elections or call that polling location. And so this is a really crucial point for our poll monitors. And ideally, we will have poll monitors who are handling that, so our peacekeepers are not. Poll observers. I talked about this earlier, so I'll do this really quickly. Political parties whose candidates are competing in the election, as well as groups of 5 or more candidates, may each appoint one election observer for each precinct. via notification to the Board of Elections no later than 11 days prior to the election. So we are coming up on that. But observers must be qualified electors, meaning they possess qualification under Ohio law to be entitled to vote. In addition, observers may not be a candidate. A uniformed peace officer, such as a sheriff or police or any other law enforcement officer, highway state trooper, or another member of a fire department, basically anyone who has to wear a uniform, whether they're a member of the military or an organized militia, cannot be an observer that can intimidate voters. A person wearing any other uniform or carrying a firearm or deadly weapon, because firearms and deadly weapons are not allowed inside of poll locations. Continuing on with our observers, they are not permitted to interfere with the election officials doing their jobs or otherwise slow down the operation of a polling location or to interact with voters in a manner that interferes with or disrupts an election. Observers may not use any electronic communication device or any audio-visual recording device. These can intimidate voters. If such a device were to impede or interfere with or disrupt an election in any way or intimidate a voter or risk violating the secrecy of a ballot or voter privacy, observers may not enforce the law or advocate on behalf of voters. So these are some important things to realize, but also these things should be kind of policed or supervised by our precinct election officials rather than by our peacekeepers. And so there are special elements to note for this primary season, and that we need to be prepared for confusion, especially because this primary, the first primary, is for statewide and national elections. We are not sure exactly when the second primary will take place at this time. But early voting has begun. We are in the week of April 18th to the 22nd. So our our early vote locations are open from 8 to 5. Again, those early vote locations are typically your county boards of elections. So this week until today and tomorrow, well, it's after 5 now. So tomorrow the board will be open from 8 a.m. till 5 p.m. Next week, we have 8 a.m. to 7 p.m. On the 30th, which is the 30th, which I believe is that Sunday, is 8 a.m. until 4 p.m. That's Saturday, 8 a.m. to 4 p.m. May 1st, so Sunday, May 1st is open from 1 to 5. So some of you all and some of your congregants, if you are of the Christian faith, may be going after church on Sunday. And on May 2nd, the day before Election Day, 8 a.m. to 2 p.m. And again, if a voter is in line when those polling locations or early vote centers close, they are required to be able to vote. So the boards have to stay open to let folks vote. If there are 100 people, if you bring your entire congregation and they are in line at 2 o'clock, I'm sorry for that Board of Elections or that early vote center, but they will be staying open to make sure that all of the folks that come from X or Y location are able to vote on that Sunday, on Sunday at 5 o'clock.
Catherine makes a note that poll monitors often travel between and among polling locations. So you might have some traveling folk from location to location. Just
Correct.
be prepared for that.
And again, election protection hotline. So 866-R-VOTE, 888-VE-VOTA, 888-API-VOTE, 844-YALA-US. So there are a couple of different languages that are available for our election protection hotline. And so it's important that this information is available and that we're aware of this. Also, if we're not asking you to have these committed to memory, you see, I clearly do not. But if you just Google election protection hotline, I want to say it's electionprotection.com. There will be a website that pops up as your first Google search result that will allow you to inform folks that they are looking for this and there's not a poll monitor present. But the nonpartisan election protection hotline to provide nonpartisan information about registration status, polling location, voter rights, and has an intake process for voter rights violations.
Okay. Susan?
So as you prepare to do this work, we ask that you remember safety first. And if you want to wear a mask, wear your mask. And you're not required to, but it's good to have. And I heard somebody today say, wear a good one. The blue ones that you see are not so good. So, wear a good one. Prepare for the weather. Charge your phone and bring a battery charger, a phone charger, because you don't know how long you may be in line. Figure out what bathrooms are for you and for others, and you might have to ask people to hold a spot in line for a voter who needs to use the bathrooms. I don't think bathroom access is a real problem. I think it varies. Ife, does it vary in voting places? Can you go into the facility to use the bathroom and come out, or do you have to find something else?
Typically, yeah, you can.
Okay,
Yeah.
so a part of our work as peacekeepers would be to find out if that is permitted at the location where you're at, so we can tell people the right thing if they have the question.
But you
Be
don't,
wary.
but as long as as long as you're not interacting with voters inside the polling location. So if you have to go to the restroom, go to the restroom. Of course, wash your hands, especially in this COVID. Wash your hands. Remain masked. But don't communicate until you come back out. Sorry about that. Keep going, Reverend Sue.
Oh, that's cool. Be wary of people asking about illegal things. Ife, can you give us an example of what some of these illegal things are?
So some people might ask, like, "Oh, I heard that so and so isn't registered to vote here." Again, those are things that like the precinct election official will handle. If somebody's asking, if somebody said like, "Oh, somebody has a weapon," again, that's something that's going to be handled by your precinct election official. It's not for us to be police officers or to be precinct election officials. There are certain regards and certain matters that those folks will handle. If you're informed about a weapon, you want to talk to the precinct election official. But some people ask like, "Oh, I heard that this person that you can vote twice," and it's like those are the types of questions that we're answering. Everybody can only vote once. Some people will ask questions just to give them more ground to cause a scene or to cause controversy or to disrupt the election, and that's what we don't want to participate in.
So we might be able to get some more of these illegal things so that people can be aware of them. So if they hear them, because a lot of you can't, report something that you don't know if it's illegal. So maybe we can work on that. Bring food and water. Everybody has heard that there may be a problem in some places. I don't know. They're bringing people water. So bring food and water, a little bit extra if you see somebody in need. Faith leaders, they say to wear your clerical garb. That's something I learned from Dan Clark, because I tend to be like a hobo and I go out to actions and I just wear like a t-shirt and stuff. And Dan said, Susan, you must wear your clerical stuff because it does give you the presence of the moral presence or the idea of a moral presence. So wear your clerical garb. Look for other clergy there as allies and look for the poll monitors, and then make sure, this is so important, that you greet the poll monitors. Go up to them when you arrive at your place. Make sure that you introduce yourself. They know you, you know them. It's very, very important. It's much easier to be in communication with a poll monitor if you have already kind of established the connection, and then make sure that the team, whatever your team is, does the same thing, because everybody needs to know who the go-to people are. So that's very important. Next slide. Don't enter the polling site. Don't interfere with voters' access. Don't engage in any partisan discussion under any circumstances. Don't incite, provoke, or escalate confrontations. We wouldn't do that. But if you find that somebody has gotten on your last nerve, and it can happen, just because you're called a peacekeeper, it doesn't mean you have it all together. If somebody has gotten on your last nerve, that's when you call your team member over and you say, this is on you. You understand that that's why we are a team, because some people have that gift. They can just find the nerve that you keep hidden, and then they can step on it and make it very raw. And so you contact your team members and get help for that. Don't promote candidates or issues. Don't answer questions that you don't know about. That's why I think it's important for us to know what the illegal things are, so we know what we're talking about. And don't argue with election officials or workers. Instead, call the 866-hour vote. So those are very important things for us not to do. So this is good here. This is a good break. My question to you is, what concerns are you bringing to your position as a peacekeeper in this election? What concerns you, or what concerns you in general about this election or these elections coming up? You can put it in the chat, or you can say it out loud. And Catherine says, do take photos. That's cool. Thanks, Catherine.
And by that, I mean selfies in many cases, because I'm not suggesting we take pictures of voters. I just know that the pictures of folks at the polls in their garb it can really encourage people to participate in the fall.
Okay. So anybody have questions? I mean, concerns that you personally are bringing into this voting season? Am I the only one that's bringing concerns?
So Susan, one of the things I've thought a lot about is that, this is an election where people go up and they request a ballot. They request a Democratic ballot, they request a Republican ballot, and people can hear what you're doing. And there's just enough friction and unhappiness that it's just seemed different than a general election where you basically go in and you vote a secret ballot. This is much more like, oh, this is who I am, or this is my belief system. And I've wondered whether the primary might be more divisive because of that.
Okay. Anybody else? Concerns you're bringing?
I'm nervous about folks thinking that they have been deputized by X or Y candidate to be the quote unquote defender of the vote and are actually intimidating voters.
My question, well, unless they've changed since the last time I did a primary, they don't come up and ask us for a ballot. They give us their name, we verify that they're a registered voter, and we give them the thing for the party that they're registered for. There's no loud talking about it unless somebody says, I want a Republican ballot, and they're a registered Democrat. All they do is ask the poll workers their names, we look them up, and however they process it to give them their card to go vote, we do it according to that party, or we tell them if they're independent that they can only do it issues only, but they don't usually have issues in primary.
One of the, so we have two components of peacekeeping. One of the components of being a peacekeeper is that we really are in tune with our own emotional place. Because how we are feeling personally will impact how we do our job. And I think everybody needs to be aware of that. I think we need to do inventory and maybe know before we go to the polls what we know we can handle and what we know we cannot, and be able to push it off on to somebody else. I think it's critical to know that. During the 60s, when they were training people in nonviolence, we're not going to talk about it, but there were some people who said straight up, I am not going to do that. I am not equipped to do nonviolence. I was reading where Jackie Robinson, the baseball player, was involved in civil rights stuff, and he straight up said, I'm not nonviolent. I'm not. And there is no shame in saying where you are. But you really do have to be, we really do have to be aware of our own emotional states of mind and be able to have conversations with other people on the team and say, and kind of gauge where they are so that we will know who to call if we're in a situation that we cannot handle. I think that's really critical. Two components of peacekeeping is prevention and de-escalation. That's fine. So we observe our environment. We know where our allies, what I just talked about, where the poll monitors are located. We look for areas that are not covered. We just look, you watch. It's like when you cook with, with the ingredients, but you cook with your nose and you cook with, your sense of what's going on. You have to use your other senses. We have to observe the actors in the situation. We have to watch mood and body language. We are, I think, charged with anticipating and heading off, warding off problems before they become problems. What kind of violence or abuse has happened or is happening? If we hear abusive language, that is not acceptable. So we get in touch with the poll monitors or the poll workers and get them to handle that. We don't want anybody to be harmed either physically or emotionally or verbally. Violence is not just a physical thing. Violence is all of the above. What's happening with individuals not directly involved, we might be called to, kind of, maybe kind of reconstitute a particular area if there is some confusion going on in a particular area, and those who are, we're charged with de-escalating as much as we can, but we're also charged with making sure that the election process goes as smoothly as possible. So we might have to, do some moving around of people in lines or something like that. We will discuss that with our team members. And then we would also decide whether or not we need to call more peacekeepers. In the last election, there were a couple of instances where peacekeepers were actually called, more peacekeepers. So we have to watch, we have to listen, we have to see with our eyes and feel with our spirits what is going on so that we can handle any situation that we might be confronted with. So how we approach people, we might have somebody who's kind of being kind of feisty, maybe it's about a mask. So you introduce yourself. Hi, I'm Reverend Sue. How are you? Can I help you with something? And ask, get there, because what we're trying to do, guys, is form relationships with people, even relationships with people whom we really don't like. This is the exercise in Christianity 101. This is the exercise of the great commandment in ways that we don't even want to think about. So we go up to a person that this might even repulse us. Hi, my name is Reverend Sue. What can I do? Can I help you? Don't just say, okay, well, I'm going to help you do so and so. They might not want our help. They might just really want to talk. Don't tell them what to do. Engage them. What's going on? And we did some role plays at our last session, and we'll do some more later on. But what's going on? Because a lot of times just getting people in a conversation can de-escalate a situation. We make assumptions about what we see and about what we hear, but just getting people in a conversation, we can get that. We really have an amazing tool to use. Listen, 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 listen. This whole thing is about listening to people. Part of the reason that the world is so jacked up is because so many people feel like they are not listened to. And in the conversations that we have, we find common ground. I don't care who you are. You can be the worst bigot and the most active activist, but in the midst of all that, there's some commonality. There's some human commonality. We look for common ground. We call for the partners if we need some help. And we might want to call for the partners before we engage with a person that's causing a little bit of a stir, because we have watched, we have sensed, we feel the type of tension that's there. Follow the masking rules. We're not there to enforce mask rules, but we want to model them. And again, this is a place where you will really want to know your spirit. If somebody gets up in your face without a mask and wants to, what are you wearing a mask for? And you know that you can't handle that, you immediately, before you even get in conversation, you pull somebody over who can handle that type of situation. All right. Because those people are out there. Respect folks if they need more space, and work with your partners in advance when and how to call for outside help. Very important. Again, if we keep thinking that this is about relationships, it's going to help us a lot. We stop situations from escalating if possible. Those conversations with people are amazing. We observe the mood and behave. Thank you, Joan. Faith leaders, be sure to wear our clerical garb. We've already talked about that. Ignore offline harassers. Ignore them. There might be people there who are really trying to get the last nerve that you keep hidden underneath your toe. We want to ignore them. Distract the voters. Maybe there's somebody who is uptight. Sometimes people are uptight not because of where they are, but because of something else that's going on in their lives. So if we talk to the people and ask them about something else, to get them to talk about something entirely different, we might get them to a place where we can have a conversation where we can get to what's really bugging them. Polite apologies by us helps us to calm things down. I'm sorry, I'm not trying to, get into your business. I'm not trying to do, but it feels like there's a problem here. Is there something that I can do to help? And then remind people that we're all standing in this line together to make sure that we can all vote. Now, somebody again gets in your face, well, I'm an American, I'm a patriot. And you just want to slap the fire out of them because it makes you that angry. You just say, I know, I'm an American too. And just, keep it moving, but anticipate the language, anticipate the rancor, anticipate it, and prepare yourself to be able to handle that in a way that's going to bring victory or peace to everybody involved. And then make space for conflicting parties to start over, acknowledging where we are right now and what the resolution might be. very, very important things to think about when we're talking about prevention. Observe the mood and behavior of people, body language and posture, breathe, assess and plan. Breathing is so important. You know, sometimes when my kids were little, before I got mad at them, I had to breathe, because sometimes when you're angry, you know, you want to say what's on your mind, and the breathing helps you to calm down and say something in a different way, because once you say it, you can't take it back. Signal a team member. Signal poll monitors to come with you. You know, don't be all brazen about it, because if a person is already agitated, if they think that you're calling for help, then they think that, you know, a challenge is on. Challenge is on, but they don't need to know that a challenge is on. Don't abandon the voters in line. If there's some person who's just totally intimidated by what's going on and they've communicated that with you, then you kind of have to stay with them. You're going to have somebody stay with them if you can't be with them yourself, but don't leave them by themselves, because what we don't want people to do is be so intimidated that they leave the line. We don't want that. We don't want that. So we have to keep that. That's primary one. That's why we're there, because we want people to vote. Don't try to engage with large groups of agitated people. You cannot do it. You cannot do it. You see them wave, hey, how you doing? And keep moving. But we can't engage with large groups of people. Don't put yourself in harm's way, and communicate with team members in advance about when to call for help. Again, you have a powwow, but when you get there, I mean, I remember when we went out to the locations for the 2020 election, we just stood in a circle, and I had to find some of the poll workers, but we went and got together, and who's going to do what, and which area of the line are you going to be in? And so we had to know where each other was, because if you need help, you need to know. And we got phone numbers of each other so that we could call people, so we wouldn't have to leave our particular location. We could call for help. And then always report incidents to 866 Our Vote. I see Jeff's hand up.
Actually, Susan, you just covered what I was interested in getting a little more talk on, because, you know, when I worked at the Board of Elections, I was walking independently, and a lot of this information is, well, you know, you reach over and grab your friend who's working with you, who's walking with you, or you get a poll worker. But, you know, the lines were so long. It's like I was out in the desert with the people walking, and there was no poll worker close. And so that would mean tentatively a phone call, but certainly I wasn't going to leave any situation. I didn't have any, but as one was evolving, I wasn't going to address it by walking away from it, because I wanted to look for a poll worker. So that's kind of what I was chewing on, as to the practicalities of how do we get this dog to hunt if we've got some issue that's starting to flare up.
Right.
Well, and I will say that in some instances, like I know in previous in 2020, we actually had a situation at Cuyahoga between two campaigns that got really tense, and one of our peacekeepers was able to help kind of de-escalate that situation. And the election officials on the board really appreciated it, and actually like worked with us to have some of our peacekeepers have a badge from the board to kind of like be a line manager, just to kind of like help keep things as they should be, and gave a personal cell phone number, like, hey, I'm the deputy director. Like, if there's a real issue, give me a call on my cell phone. So there are instances where, I mean, we know that our boards are strapped. We know that, and that's part of why it's so crucial that we have our Peacekeeper program, because the funding to adequately staff our boards has not been allocated. And so we know that they're strapped. We know that they're under a lot of pressure, and we know that there are people who, and if there are straps within the system and the elections officials are under pressure, then our voters are going to feel that anxiety and that tension. And so it's important for us to be that calming force and that peaceful force. And for us to let the boards know that we're on the same team, we're on their side. We want to make sure that elections run smoothly, and that we're here for them, as well as for the voters. We're here for them because they are here for the voters.
And I think that's so important, because so many people feel alienated from everybody. Some people feel like, you know, everybody hates me because I'm a Republican, or everybody hates me because, and so being able to let people know that they matter. you know, we have a thing we say in our morning prayer called Salbanani, which means we see you, we respect you, we honor you, you are important to us, we are all important to each other. And so we, you know, we share that and communicate. And it's amazing how when people feel like they are heard, they back down. I have a quick story where I was at one of the elections recent, and I was not a poll worker. I was handing out stuff, and I went past that line, that 100-foot line, and this great, big, burly white man, burly. I mean, he just looked like a logger or something. He said, "Get over here." I said, "Oh, shoot." And I turned around and I looked at him, and his face was beet red. And he said, "You know, you're not supposed to be doing that." Oh, well, I kind of didn't. I was kind of new at doing what I was doing, but I came over and I just stood now. And he said, "You knew exactly what you were doing." He was yelling at me. And so, because I'm looking at this open body language thing, so it really scared the bejeebies out of me. So I went back the next day and he was there again. So I went up to him, because I didn't say anything to him because he was so mad. I mean, I thought he was going to burst an artery. He was so mad. So I went up to him the next day. I said, "Why'd you talk to me like that?" And as soon as I said it like that, yeah, because when he saw me, he was like blowing up again. When he saw me, he kind of come, and I had said that. I said, "I wasn't there," because he told me I had been there the day before. I said, "I wasn't there the day before. Yesterday was my very first day doing this. Why would you make that assumption?" I had my little clerical thing on and all of that, following Dan Clark's advice. And I said, you really don't know. None of us really know who's here, you know, and why. But I think it just really does everybody a lot of damage if we approach each other like that. And I said, I don't think God would want us to do that. I used my collar thing. I don't think God would want us to do that to each other. And he immediately calmed down. And so I think that, you know, the open body language, if I had retorted, because I wanted to go all in when he did that. I wanted to go into a place where I know I'm not supposed to go. If I had crossed my arms and if I had, you know, gotten loud, it would have escalated. We are there to de-escalate. So we don't tell people what to do. We have limited eye contact, and we listen. We don't touch anybody. We speak softly if they're yelling. We don't argue with them. If the agitation increases, just try containment and distance, you know, or say whatever we need to say. I don't even know what the horseshoe removal tactic is. Joan, what is that?
That's when you get like two or three other people, and they come and discuss with you too. And you kind of form a little horseshoe around the person and contain them. And then just as you talk to them, you walk with them. Little step here, little step there. And
Isn't
pretty
that
soon
cool?
you have the person contained and distanced. So you can
Okay,
actually talk with them.
that's cool. Jeff, you have your hand up. Is that the same hand from before? Okay, I'm sorry.
Yeah, it's the same hand, so
Okay.
I will lower my hand.
Okay, and then of course, always have call that number if you need 866 our vote for help.
Well, when we do part 2, we're going to be talking about different scenarios, and we should have also a representative from the sheriff's department at one of the counties to talk with us. So we'll do a part 2 and we'll talk to you about that. And I will be sending out the questions for you to consider so that 3 o'clock in the morning, you can read the questions on the scenarios and think about them and what you would do. We are going to be using Sign Up Genius to schedule on-call times. Unless we see that there's a real need, we're not going to be actually putting people at some of the polling places permanently. In other words, we're going to look and see what the situations are and then call people that are in the area and have them move to wherever they're needed. And we'll be doing that using Sign Up Genius, so I'll get that out to you. Look for all emails to be headed with Peacekeepers so that you know what we're talking about and you don't think that we're one of the multi-million political emails that you're getting at this time of year. And we will be emailing a copy of this to you, as well as a link for the recording, as well as a schedule. And we have a police person to talk to and we sit down and talk about scenarios. Any questions? I'm sorry, for some reason, my mouse is just really jumpy today. Questions before we, okay, because it is 7:30 and that's what we've got to do then. All right, my friends, let me close out. And as I said, we'll be going for a part 2 in some way, shape, or form, and I'll be getting the Sign Up Genius stuff out to you. And I want to close with another quote from John Lewis, who said that do not get lost in a sea of despair. Pretty easy to do that nowadays, but rather he says, be hopeful and be optimistic, for the struggle is not the struggle of a day, a week, a month, or a year. It's the struggle of a lifetime. And he says, never, ever be afraid to make some noise and get in good trouble, necessary trouble. Thank you. And I have a little song that I will play as we exit today.
Good evening. Ella Baker, a giant of the civil rights movement, left us with this wisdom. Give people light. They will find the way. Give people light. Those are words for our time. Just a week ago yesterday was the 30th.
Okay, I've got to turn the volume up. Sorry about that. Let's come back here again. My apologies. It wasn't turned up properly.
Charlottesville. Close your eyes. Remember what you saw on television. Remember seeing those neo-Nazis. Remember seeing those Klansmen coming out of fields with lighted torches, veins bulging, spewing the same anti-Semitic bile heard across Europe in the 30s. Remember the violent clash that ensued between those spreading hate and those with the courage to stand against it. And remember what the president said when asked? He said there were, quote, very fine people on both sides. It was a wake-up call for us as a country. And for me, a call to action.
People killing, people dying, children hurt and you hear them crying. Can you practice what you preach? And would you turn the other cheek? Father, 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 help us. Send some guidance from above. These people got me questioning. Where is the love?
What's wrong with the world, mama? People living like they ain't got no mamas. I think the whole world's addicted to the drama, only attracted to things that'll bring the trauma. Overseas, yeah, we trying to stop terrorism, but we still got terrorists here living in the USA, the KKK. I can't believe they still hating blacks today. Cause if you only have love for your own race, then you only leave space to discriminate. And to discriminate only generates hate. And when you hate, then you're bound to get irate. Yeah, madness is what you demonstrate. And that's exactly how hate works and operates. Man, you gotta have love and to set it straight. Take control of your mind and meditate. Let your soul gravitate to the love.
People killing, people dying, children hurt and you hear them crying. Can you practice what you preach? And would you turn the other cheek? Father, 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 help us. Send some guidance from above. These people got me questioning. Where is the love? The love, love. Where is the love? The love, the love, the love. Where is the love? The love, the love.
So the question for us is simple. Are we ready? I believe we are. We must be. We can choose a path of becoming angrier, less hopeful, more divided, a path of shadow and suspicion, or we can choose a different path and together take this chance to heal, to reform, to unite, a path of hope and light. This is a life-changing election.
This will determine what America is going to look like for a long, long time.
Yes, it is.
Character is on the ballot. Compassion is on the ballot. Decency, science, democracy.
Yeah.
They're all on the ballot. Who we are as a nation, what we stand for, and most importantly, who we want to be. That's all on the ballot. And the choice could not be more clear.